Hi everybody, I'm Michael. I'm one of your TAs this semester for automotive engineering. I have to do the timing belt today on my car, a 1997 Mazda Miata, which is a pretty canonical four-cylinder engine. And so I figured I would take this opportunity to show you the inside of an engine, show you what it looks like, help identify the parts of the engine so that when you actually take a look under the hood of a car, you know what you're talking about. So let's take a look. All right, so here's what we're looking at. I've got the car up on jack stands first. And we've got, first of all, this is, as I said, it's a pretty canonical, usual four-cylinder, 16-valve, double overhead cam, naturally aspirated, 1.8, it's either 1.6 or 1.8 liter displacement engine. And I'll break down what each of those terms mean. First of all, four cylinders. It's an inline four, meaning that all four of the cylinders are vertical. You can see that I've got four plugs here. Those are my four spark plugs. Those are directly at the top of each engine, at the top of each cylinder. So if you were to look down in here, you could almost imagine the cylinders are four vertical inline cylinders. So four inline four-cylinder engine. 1.6 or 1.8 liters, I forget which one this is, refers to the total displacement of the engine, which means that if you were to, it's the volume of all the cylinders combined. So if we have 1.6 liters, that's how much, well, actually it refers to the bore times stroke. So the actual cylinders will be a little bit bigger than that. So let's take a look at this engine when it comes to which side we're taking fuel in, which side is our intake side, and which side is our exhaust side. So we have, if you were to follow this, some of the clues here is that, first of all, this is an exhaust manifold. Now, what's a manifold? A manifold is just a piece which takes multiple pipes and puts it into one pipe. So we have four cylinders and four pipes coming out of the cylinder, and then we have this thing, which is a manifold, which is now taking that into one solid pipe, which is going out the bottom there, and that's going to go to the exhaust pipe. If you trace that, that goes to the exhaust pipe. So now we can say, okay, well, this is our exhaust side of the engine, which means that the other side has to be an intake side. So this is where the fuel and the air is going into the engine. And so we have, so this is a fuel-injected engine as opposed to a carbureted engine. A fuel-injected engine uses electronic pumps to pump fuel into the air mixture. A carbureted engine uses a carburetor, which is a mechanical device which mixes the fuel in the air. You might have learned about it in your fluid dynamics class. So the advantage is that carburetors are older technology. They're mechanical. They don't require electronics anywhere. However, they're less reliable and they are bad at starting in cold weather. So they're one of the reasons that you have to warm up an engine, among other reasons. But so this has a fuel-injected engine, which means you've got four fuel injectors, just little spritzers, basically. Now, if we were to look at this, this is our intake manifold. So as opposed to our exhaust manifold on that side, we have our intake manifold, and it's getting air in, it's taking in air and fuel. So let's trace those lines. So first of all, the air line is big, and right here, it's a crossover tube here. I'm not exactly sure why Mazda decided to put the air intake box where they did, but you have an air filter in here, and this is where the car is breathing from, and it actually comes out over there. Not sure exactly why they do that, but this is our air intake. So air is coming in through here and going into the intake manifold. We also have fuel injectors in here, and one of these tubes is coming from the gas tank. I think, there we go, fuel hose. So that's going back to my gas tank somewhere. I've got a fuel filter somewhere, and we're getting fuel in, and it's mixing in here and then going down these four pipes into the engine. Oh, here we go. Here's two fuel hoses right there. So it must be there must be 4 separate fuel hoses for the 4 separate fuel injectors, 2 on this side, and then 1, probably 2 somewhere over there. Good. So next thing we're going to talk about is the cooling of the engine. There are really 2 types of engines. We have water-cooled and air-cooled engines. Almost all modern engines are water-cooled. Air-cooled engines really went by the wayside decades ago. And that's because water-cooled engines are more complicated, but provide much better cooling. So the idea is that engines produce a lot of heat, and they need to dump it off somewhere, otherwise they're just going to melt and turn into a blob. So what we have up here at the front is a radiator. It's a little bit difficult to see. I'll show you this one when I take it out. And it's got a cooling loop. And so we have lines which go from place to place and cool the engine. And there's a circular loop here which heats up the coolant. The coolant is just water with antifreeze in it. The antifreeze is, of course, so that in Ithaca weather, when it gets below freezing, your engine doesn't freeze up. We got water with antifreeze in there, which is why if you're ever driving down the road and you see a warning light which says something along the lines of overheating or has a symbol for overheating, you should immediately stop. Don't keep driving because you could get severe engine damage if you let your car overheat. And what a lot of people do is you can, if your coolant is low, then you can go to your coolant line, which we can follow here. Let's figure out where my coolant reservoir is. We can see our radiator is here and follow that tube. And there we go. This is our coolant reservoir. You can see that I'm doing pretty well on coolant. What you can actually do is you can just pour water in here. Now, of course, read your owner's manual. Don't take your TA's advice for it because all cars are different. But conventional wisdom is, yeah, you can just put a little water in there, especially when you're in a pinch, to keep your engine cool. So there's your coolant line. So we're going to take out the radiator, and I'll show you that in a little bit more detail. A couple other parts you can see right off the top. We have our fuse box here. So this is a really simple engine. This is a 1997 car, so we just have a couple different fuses in here. Let me take a look at that. Let me see if I can get this on. There we go. Shoot. All right, well, we've got some fuses in there, so if something happens to your electronic system, then, these fuses will blow before it breaks the electronics. So that's your fuse box. If your electronics are screwing up, this is a pretty good place to look. Most cars have a battery up here, a car battery. If you want to jumpstart your car, that's where you're going to go. You're going to go under the hood. This car actually has the battery in the trunk. And the reason for that is that it helps in the weight distribution of the car. This car has a 50-50 weight distribution, which is good for handling. So we got the battery in the back. But in this case, it's just a battery. It's just a car battery. Nothing really much to see there. I actually forgot to take a picture of my radiator, but this is what a radiator looks like. So this is the engine without a lot of the covers on. So what I wanted to show you is the camshafts. So camshafts are a part of an engine. Well, let me start from the beginning. Camshafts in general are shafts which have eccentric lobes on them. So if you look at this, that's an eccentric lobe. So you can imagine when that spins around, once this part hits the bottom, or if I were to just have my finger ride on this while it's spinning, my finger would be lifted up and down. And cams and followers are a very general mechanical engineering mechanism. You can really get pretty much any profile you want, any Y of T, because you just machine these lobes to a certain shape. They don't have to be shaped like this. They can be all bumpy. They can have whatever you want within reason, and it's going to push on a follower up and down, and depending on how fast you spin it, you're going to get a different motion profile on your follower. So in this case, what these are doing is this camshaft is actuating the valves. And if you look down in there, you can see springs, very, very stiff springs. Those are the valve springs. So the valves let air and fuel into the cylinder for combustion, and then that's what happens on this side. And then these are the exhaust valves, and they let the exhaust out when you're done. This is a 4-cylinder, 16-valve engine, meaning that we have 2 intake valves and 2 exhaust valves on every cylinder. Now you ask, why would you do that? Well, the answer is you can get a higher flow rate if you have more, if you have twice as many valves. Now, Professor Callister either is going to or has gone over this in lecture, but basically it's a geometrical trade-off on a round cylinder. Now, theoretically, cylinders don't have to be round and valves don't have to be round, but it machines better. It makes a better machine if everything's nice and round. So we have here is these valves. See how the lobes on the camshaft, those 2 are the same, those 2 are the same, those 2 are the same, those 2 are the same. So what we have is, this is the pair exhaust for cylinder 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if exhaust for cylinder 1 all fires at the same time, which makes sense. There's no reason to have the exhaust valves be different between cylinders. Down there, down the hatch, that's where the spark plug would go. So, you can sort of imagine the cylinder goes right up and down through here, and the spark plug is directly in the top. We have our intake side over here and our exhaust side over here. So that's the camshaft setup. Another thing that I should mention about this camshaft setup is that this engine is a double overhead cam engine, meaning that we have 2 camshafts, one for intake and one for exhaust. Theoretically, we could have a single overhead cam. We could just have one camshaft right down the middle, which has lobes for both our intake side and our exhaust side. Now, you'll often see people brag about having double overhead cam, DOHC. It's actually written on the casing of this motor, which is currently in my basement. But what's the advantage of that? What's the point of having DOHC? The answer is that it comes down to flexibility in the system and response time. So we know from our lecture that if you spin the engine faster, you get more power because you're getting more explosions per second. And so being able to operate those valves at extremely high speed and being able to do it with great precision at very high speed is advantageous. It allows you to run your engine really fast, having a lot of explosions per second. And so if you have a double overhead cam, what you can do is you can have the system be physically smaller and physically more rigid. So if you imagine if we only had one camshaft going down the center of this, we would have to have lever arms. We would have to have, sometimes there are rockers, which are levers which ride on the camshaft. The camshaft pushes it down. You can see it push my pinky up and my thumb down, and my thumb would push down the valve. But then that rocker arm has some flexibility in it. Sometimes we have push rods. Push rods either come up from the bottom of the engine and push all the way up, so you'd have your camshafts at the bottom, and those would push up on the valves. But the double overhead cam engine has more rigidity in it, which is the reason why people brag about it. It's the reason why it's a good design. So this shot was actually taken about halfway through the process of changing out my water pump. What you can see is we have our engine block here, and the water pump is currently removed. The water pump will go, right here and connect this to that. It would pump it through here to there. What you actually see is that the engine is cooled because the engine block, which is right here, that's actually the cylinder. That's the outside wall of the cylinder. And the whole engine block is pretty much hollow. And there's just coolant running through there all the time. And then the water pump, which is, a coolant pump, as I said, the coolant is mostly water. It's water with antifreeze in it. The water pump, which is right here, this is the old one, it's got an impeller, just like you guys remember from 2250. It's got an impeller on there, and that's what sucks out it's what pumps the water around. So this goes right in there. But I just wanted to show you that, when it comes to water-cooled engines, this one, in fact, the engine block is actually hollow, and that's where the cooling is happening. Well, I actually forgot to take footage of this while the covers were off, but I've got here the new timing belt on the top. And the timing belt routes around these two gears on the top, and is routed through the inside of the engine, and then goes around a small pulley on the bottom of the engine. So this is the crankshaft. This is where the pistons are actually working on the engine. And then they're timed. There's a tensioner and an idler over here. The other belts that we're going to have on here are the two accessory belts. So one goes from the crankshaft to the alternator and to the water pump. The other one goes from the crankshaft to, this is the power steering unit. So because I forgot to take a picture while I had the engine apart, here's a photograph of the timing belt routing for this car. So what does a timing belt actually do? What the timing belt does is it connects the timing of the crankshaft to the camshaft. So the crankshaft is where the pistons are actually doing work on the engine. The crankshaft is connected to the transmission, which eventually goes to the wheels. And we need the camshafts to be timed properly to that so that the valves are opening and closing at the right time. So a timing belt, or a timing chain, some cars have timing chains, is a toothed belt which makes sure that the camshafts are running at the right time relative to the crankshaft. So you can see at the bottom we have the crankshaft, and at the top we have those two camshaft sprockets that I pointed out. In the middle we have tensioners and idlers to make sure that the belt stays tensioned, it doesn't slip at all. And one of the important things is that when you're doing the timing for a car, there are certain timing notches and certain timing marks which you need to make sure that you set properly so that your valves are opening and closing at the right time. But this is the general idea behind a timing belt. Timing belts need to be replaced every certain amount of time. It's a very common automotive task. It's relatively expensive because you have to take a lot of the engine apart to get to it. And not replacing your timing belt could cause your timing belt could cause it to snap over time. That would be pretty bad because first of all, your engine wouldn't work. There are two types of engines. There are interference and non-interference engines. And what that has to do is an interference engine means that if your valves are open when your piston goes to top dead center, your piston is going to smack into your valve. And that's really bad. That'll cause a lot of problems. A non-interference engine means that even if your timing belt is totally whack, even if your timing is totally off, the piston will never hit the valves, even if the valves are open. So this is what a timing belt does. It connects the crankshaft, which is where the engine does work, to the camshaft, which regulates when the valves open and close. All right, well, that just about does it for today. I hope that you guys have learned something from this video. I certainly had fun making it. If you have any questions about anything that I mentioned in this video, please post them on EdDiscussion. I, as well as the rest of the course staff, am happy to answer questions about the practical applications of the stuff we talk about in class. So that's all for today, and I'll see you in lecture.